"Joshua, it's not what you think," is all my wife Beverly could say before I grabbed her boyfriend Paramore and kicked him out to my Hummer. That day was a total shocker and changed my life big time. Today, I'm gonna spill the beans. I'm Joshua and I've been hitched to Beverly for a good 18 years. We've been raising our daughter Ruby, who's 18 now and starting college. So, I'm still working and Bev is still running our household. Our story started when we were both just 20 years old, and only 2 months into dating, we found out Bev was pregnant. My reaction was surprisingly positive, even though I wasn't sure how we were gonna handle it all. I quickly popped the question and we got hitched. Times were tough for sure, especially since neither of us had much schooling. Bev took on the job of managing the house when Ruby came along and our finances were tight. I was in a tough spot when I got laid off and we were struggling to pay the bills. We had to borrow some money just to get by. We were crammed into a tiny 15 square meter space in my parents' house and we weren't sure what was going to happen next. But when Ruby turned 4, I found a better job and things started looking up. With a steadier income, we were able to move out and find a cozy little place in the city. I went to the outskirts to make sure Ruby had a better life. I got another job, working long hours during the day at my main job and then working evenings at a second job. It was tough, but we made it through. I worked hard during the day and then put in more hours at night at my second job. It was a tough time, but we made it through and paid off all our debts. So, we bought our house a couple years back and I finally got my dream Hummer. It was a goal we'd been saving up for. We also put money aside for Ruby's college fund. I've been making progress in my career, which I never thought I could do without a formal education. But with hard work and taking initiative, I got the support and encouragement of my bosses and moved up to a higher position. My paycheck now supports our family just fine. Even though we don't live lavishly, we are happy. I made sure everything important was taken care of, with the most important thing being my daughter Ruby's well-being. I always thought I was doing a good job raising her, but my stress levels went through the roof when she brought her first boyfriend Andrew home. He went to the same college as Ruby, but from the moment he walked into my house, I just couldn't stand him. I couldn't explain why, but I just didn't think he was good enough for my daughter. I kept wondering, what does she see in him anyway? Ruby finally spilled the beans and told us she's been seeing Andrew on the sly for 3 months. She told Beverly she was worried about how I would react, thinking I would blow up. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. I kept my dislike for Andrew under wraps and acted all nice and friendly. I asked him questions and tried to be supportive, but I could tell he was trying to flirt with someone else. Every time he came over, I made sure to stick close to Ruby and keep an eye on him. Text in colloquial English, so me and her were talking the other day, right before that thing happened. When I walked in, she was like, "Dad, I don't really want to get into this topic." Then Ruby goes, "Andrew is just okay, nothing special." And I was like, "I don't really care what you think, I have my own opinion. I'm not trying to lecture you, but I just don't get why you like him. He has no real future, no job, and I heard he's not doing well in school either, which is pretty much his only way to improve his situation. Hey Dad, have you ever needed a reason to love Mom?" Ruby said, "I'm not saying you did, but Mom always believed in me and I felt confident. I used to have a passion, but I don't see that same drive in Andrew. That's probably because Mom got pregnant with me and you had to step up. You don't even have an education and you're talking about Andrew. We've only been together for 4 months. I'm not saying I want to be with him forever. Maybe I'll end things with him in a few days, but right now, everything about him works for me," Ruby said, but before I could say anything, she cut me off and said, "Enough, Dad, drop it. I'm sick of this topic. Can I ask one more question?" "All right, but I don't have to answer if I don't like it," Ruby replied. "Okay, has anything happened between you and Andrew?" she asked. "Yep, more than once. I'm 18, so I can make decisions about my own body," Ruby declared, shocking me with her honesty. "When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us?" "All right, so this is the second question we agreed on, we said just one question. Plus, Mom already knows, so that's it." "Good night Dad, I gotta study for exams," Ruby said firmly before saying goodnight and leaving. I felt annoyed and determined to find out the truth, so I went straight to Beverly. When I walked into our bedroom, Beverly was lying on the bed reading a book. I told her the news without giving away my plans. "Hey babe, guess what I just found out?" she asked. "What's up, honey?" she replied playfully. I then mentioned our daughter, trying to get to the bottom of things. "So, I was talking to my wife about this dude James or Andrew, can't remember which one, and she was all like, yeah, I know. Ruby spilled the beans, but she specifically told you not to bring it up. But then my wife just straight up confessed everything herself. I totally forgot what I was even trying to say in the first place." Beverly's reaction got under my skin. I couldn't figure out why she was sticking up for Andrew. We ended up getting into a heated argument and went to bed mad, not speaking to each other. I just couldn't wrap my head around why my wife was on Andrew's side and thought he was a good guy. Her defending him just made me even more annoyed. When Andrew started crashing at our place all the time, Ruby started letting him stay overnight in her room. I thought Beverly was just being nice to Andrew because he had a rough upbringing in foster care. Even though I felt bad for Andrew and his tough childhood, I still had some doubts about him. Hey, so I got home super late last night, around 11 p.m., and saw Andrew's sneakers on the doorstep. He definitely wasn't supposed to be there at that hour. I had made it clear that there should be no random people in the house when I got back from work, usually around 8 p.m. Since it was way past that time, Andrew should have either left or been on his way out. To my surprise, Beverly had let Andrew stay without even asking me. Ever since that happened, we've been arguing almost every day, mainly because of Andrew's constant presence. It's been a total mess. Talking to my daughter and Beverly, I couldn't sleep. It felt like my own family was ditching me for some random guy in our house, always putting his needs first. Every time I came home, there was food, but on the nights Andrew stayed over, I'd find leftovers because he ate so much of my food. These little things were really starting to annoy me. It's only been a month since I found out my daughter was dating Andrew and is already. Yo, this dude has been living in my house, eating my food, and trying to get with my daughter. The day after the fight with Beverly and Ruby, I went to work feeling bummed out. Ruby was studying for an exam and Beverly was handling things at home. As I drove to work, I couldn't stop thinking about kicking this guy out. If I did that, my wife and daughter would never forgive me. I didn't know what to do. Instead, I just went to work with a lot of energy and got all my morning tasks done. Hey, just getting ready for a meeting where I gotta pitch this new project. Then, my boss Richard was like, "Joshua, you didn't forget about our meeting in an hour and a half, right? You ready?" I told him, "No worries boss, I'm all set." But then it hit me, I left all the docs I needed at home. How could I be so stupid? I freaked out and ran to my assistant, telling her I had to dip for like 30 minutes and asked her to hold it down for me. She was cool with it and said, "No problem. Sure thing, Mr. Joshua. I'll take care of it." I raced to my car and drove home as fast as I could. On the way, I tried calling Beverly to see if she could grab the documents from the living room and bring them to me, but unfortunately she didn't pick up. So, I decided to call Ruby next, thinking she might already be home. "Dad, are you crazy? I'm still waiting for my turn and you're calling and distracting me. I told you I'd call as soon as I finished the exam," she scolded before hanging up, realizing time was running out. Man, I was speeding like crazy to get to this meeting on time. I couldn't mess it up because getting approval meant getting a fat bonus, a raise, and maybe even a promotion. When I got home, I looked at the clock and it was already 3 p.m. Dang, I've only been driving for 30 minutes. I gotta step it up. Meeting was supposed to be at 2:15 p.m. I had to quickly get into the house and then go back to work. But when I tried to open the front door, it was locked, which was weird because it's usually open during the day. I never bring my keys with me to avoid losing them. So I decided to try the back entrance, but that was also locked. I was getting annoyed. I went to the kitchen window and heard loud music coming from the second floor. It sounded like Beverly was cleaning and jamming out to some tunes. I thought about going in through the window, but it was only partially open, so it was a bit of a challenge to get in. I had to reach real far to grab the handle, but luckily I didn't come up short and I was able to move it to get inside. As soon as I got in, I noticed that the house was still a mess from this morning when I left for work. Upstairs, the music was still blasting, so I decided to check it out. But then I saw Beverly's phone on the nightstand with 3 missed calls from me, and below that, I saw something else. Got some messages from Andrew but couldn't read them cause my phone was locked. Gave me a weird feeling. Started thinking why this dude had my wife's contacts and if this was happening all the time. Walked up to the second floor. Music was so loud at first I couldn't hear anything. But as I got closer, I heard some clear sounds. When I got to the second floor corridor, I heard moans. Our bedroom door was slightly open and the music was blending with it. I heard some moaning and rhythmic noises coming from the room, so I crept up to the door real careful like. And what do I see first? Beverly's lace pants, the ones she always wears on our anniversary. I took a step closer and could see inside the room clearer. I peeked in, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And there I saw my wife and some young dude getting cozy from behind. I couldn't tell right away, but it turned out to be Andrew. They were totally caught up in what they were doing, didn't even notice me there. Man, the feelings I had in that moment were all over the place. I was so shocked that I didn't know what to say. Quickly, I whipped out my phone and started recording a 30-second video, just in case. Then, I snuck up behind him and grabbed his leg, yanking him off the bed and onto the floor. That's when I realized it was Andrew. He laid there for a bit, trying to figure out what just happened. I grabbed my phone again and snapped a pic of his confused face. At the same time, Beverly saw me and I grabbed Andrew by his. I grabbed his leg and started dragging him across the floor, and Beverly freaked out and yelled, "Joshua, it's not what you think," as I kept pulling the guy downstairs. The music suddenly stopped and Beverly came running out, begging me to leave Andrew alone and that it was all her fault. But I ignored her pleas, and Andrew, who couldn't defend himself against someone weighing 110 kilograms, had no choice. I pushed open the front door and Beverly, wearing just a robe, tried to stop me as I dragged Andrew along the ground. I just dodged around her and made my way to the car when she tried to stop me from getting to the vehicle. I told her to leave or things would get ugly, and she ran off. I guided Andrew into the backseat of my Hummer and warned him not to move. He nodded, showing he understood. As I closed the door, I saw my neighbor taking care of his lawn, looking shocked and surprised. I reassured him, "Don't worry, Anthony, it's a learning experience. The kid will be okay." I called out to my neighbor and I was just about to hop in the car when my wife came out of the house yelling at me, "Joshua, if you leave now, I'll call the cops." I realized my wife wasn't scared anymore, so I turned to Andrew and asked, "Dude, did I drop you off?" Andrew quickly said no, so I told my wife to ask him if he was in our bedroom earlier today. He admitted it, saying everything was cool, and we hit the road. About 5 minutes later, Beverly started blowing up my phone, followed by a call from my boss. My work life was a mess now. That was all in the past, so I just ignored the notifications. 5 minutes later, Andrew finally asked me, "Are you gonna off me?" I had something better in mind, though. I responded after 40 minutes. We got to the college entrance where my daughter Ruby was wrapping up her exams. I told Andrew to leave. He looked like he wanted to say something, but my serious tone made me say it again, "Get out now and don't move. It'll only make things worse." Andrew nodded in understanding. I carefully opened the door and stepped out onto the street. I quickly positioned myself at a distance to watch. Andrew was standing there, shaking in fear, covering his junk with his hands. In my head, I couldn't help but see him as a brave guy for trying to seduce my wife. He could have run away or stayed in the car, but he followed my orders. Who was I to tell him what to do? It was funny to me that he actually listened. After about 3 minutes, a group of students gathered around Andrew, curious about what was going on. Started laughing and throwing paper scraps at him, while others took pictures and a few just stood there watching, like me. And then suddenly, Ruby came out from the main entrance looking all serious, probably because she had already called Beverly. Beverly had told her that I was some kind of evil dad who kidnapped her boyfriend, which was actually true. Beverly had really painted me out to be a villain to Ruby. I quickly went over to Ruby to stop her from going near Andrew, who was now yelling for her and trying to get her attention. Started to back off from me, going the other way at the same time. Andrew tried to run towards Ruby, but some guy got in his way and knocked him down. Someone had called the cops on Andrew for looking messed up near a school. I ran after Ruby, yelling that I would explain everything, but she sped up and called for help. Eventually, she started running desperately seeking assistance. I realized it was pointless. When I got back to the car, I saw a police car parked nearby. So I was dropping off Andrew and I couldn't help but smirk. I was in the car, so I decided to turn my notifications back on. I saw a message from Ruby telling me to never come near her again. Beverly called me like 6 times and my boss called me a crazy 23 times. Shit was getting real, I was feeling lost. I ended up drowning my sorrows at a bar until the next morning. Started off with some beers and ended up with whiskey. I ended up chatting with some dudes at the bar and telling them my story. At first, they didn't believe me, but when I showed them the pics, they were like, damn. I was totally shook the next morning, so I decided not to drive and just called a cab to take me to a hostel. I stayed there for 2 days, bought a pen and notebook, and thought about what to do next. I sent a quick message to my boss, telling him what was up. He understood and told me to get back to him once things calmed down. So I turned off my phone on the second day and came up with a plan, taking all the risks into account. It was time to head back home, with my main goal being to keep a good relationship with my daughter. I thought she might not be happy with me at first, but I was hopeful that she would eventually see where I was coming from. But on my way home, things took a crazy turn. Just 500 meters away, the cops pulled me over and took me to the station. I was shocked to find out that Beverly had reported me for breaking into the house, attacking her, and kidnapping Andrew, making him wait by the college. Under pressure, what really got to me was when Ruby said the same things. At first, I was completely confused by these accusations and immediately asked for a lawyer. On the same day, I wrote out a detailed description of what actually happened and included evidence like videos and photos. I made it clear that Andrew had come with me willingly, and my neighbor, who was watering his lawn at the time, backed me up. He said Andrew didn't resist and didn't hear any threats. Plus, my neighbor added. So, when they arrested Andrew, I played it cool and acted like nothing fishy was going on. They believed me at first, but then Beverly and Ruby showed up with a lawyer because their stories didn't match up. Ruby wouldn't even look at me, and Beverly gave me a dirty look that really hurt. It sucked seeing my own wife treat me like that. The lawyer said Ruby didn't know Beverly and Andrew were connected, but that was about to change. So, when I was getting grilled by the cops, my lawyer totally called it that Ruby would flip her story. She came out of the room all dramatic, hugging me and saying sorry. Turns out her mom fed her a bunch of lies and Ruby was just mad and agreed to lie about me for payback. But then she saw some pics that proved I was innocent and she changed her tune. I didn't hold it against her, I was just glad she finally saw the truth. A few months later, everything was all good between us. My divorce is finally done and dusted in court, and we sold the house and split the cash between us. Beverly had to pay me a hefty sum for her lies. Andrew got off the hook, but got kicked out of college and had to bail because everyone found out the truth and started mocking him. My boss was cool enough to reschedule some meetings, so I had time to improve my work, which I ended up presenting successfully and got a fat bonus, double pay, and a well-earned promotion. I also moved into a smaller house. So, Ruby decided to just get a cheaper car and stick around until she finished college. Beverly, on the other hand, went back to live with her parents and got a job to pay off what she owed. Obviously, Ruby wasn't too keen on talking to Beverly, and I totally backed her on that. Eventually, things went back to normal. Looking back, I want everyone to understand that life can throw some unexpected curveballs and you gotta be ready to make tough choices. As for regrets, well, do I have any? I've been thinking about what happened for a while now, but I've come to see it as a chance for a new beginning. I'm making more time for myself, hanging out with Jim, and most importantly, putting my daughter first. Things are going pretty good for me, and hopefully, my experience can teach you something valuable. I wouldn't wish this on anyone, so I wish everyone the best of luck. Alright, that was a good story, now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned. Alright, so here's the deal, me, my ex, Pepper, her new man Steve, his ex Maria, my daughter Sarah, and my buddy Jason are all part of this revenge plan. Pepper and I had a rocky marriage. Looking back, I see I was really into her, but it seems like she was more interested in someone else. Before we got hitched, I was the one holding down the fort financially and making life easier for us. She already had a son named Bob who was way too into pills, and I had another son that I had full custody of. Then Sarah came along. I tried my best to make things work between us, but things got too tough to handle. We ended up deciding to split up. Because of my job that needed me to travel sometimes and my custody of my son, I moved back to my hometown. When I moved to a new place, my folks helped out and I kept an apartment in the same town as Pepper and Sarah to stay close to my daughter. I asked my buddy Jason, who's a lawyer, to draw up a child support agreement between Pepper and me. Just to be clear, this agreement only dealt with financial support for the kid, not custody or visitation stuff. So basically for about a year, me and Sarah had a deal where I'd chill with her for a month while my folks took care of my other kid, then I'd focus on my son for a month. But after a while, it got tough trying to juggle two households financially. Pepper wanted to move back to her hometown in a different state closer to me, so I gave up the apartment and she made the move. We kept up this new arrangement for a few more years. Me and Pepper were cool with each other, we even tried to get back together a few times. But it never worked out, even though I still had feelings for her. We just couldn't agree on important stuff like where to live. So I had to just keep moving on and started dating other people. Meanwhile, she was already seeing someone new right after I left. Even though I still loved her, our relationship turned into more of a friendship over time. Then this girl met Steve, who is a certified hacker. I didn't know much about him, but that detail becomes important later on. While they were dating, she would tell me about their dates and even text me on the day they got really close. It really hurt me, and looking back, I think that was her plan all along. But I tried my best to be a good friend and be there for her. My friend Pepper hit me up out of the blue to tell me she broke up with Steve after dating for 6 months. She realized she was actually in love with me. It was the beginning of summer, so she packed her stuff and came to my state. The plan was for them to hang out with me all summer and see if they liked it here. We had an amazing summer together, all the kids got along great, even Bob had a good time. Pepper finally made it official that we were back together. When my girl moved in with me, we got my daughter signed up for school and she even joined a cheerleading team for the summer. She made some great friends and had a blast here. But then we hit a snag. Pepper still had her own place with all her stuff in it. I offered to help her move it all with my truck, but she said her and Bob could handle it themselves. So they packed up their things and headed to their new place. You won't believe what happened after I got back home for just 3 days. Pepper dropped a bombshell. She said she's not moving out no matter what, and that she and Steve are head over heels in love and planning to live together. I was crushed, like seriously devastated. I couldn't understand why she would do this to me. And to make things worse, she made me be the one to break the heartbreaking news to Sarah, who was also devastated. Her face totally changed and made me go from feeling hurt to straight up pissed off. Sarah ended up breaking down and begging to stay with me, opening up and spilling all the beans. She told me about how her mom would go off with Steve for days, leaving Bob in charge. Sarah had to learn how to cook for herself at just 8 years old because Bob was always spending money on drugs and getting high. If Bob wasn't around, Pepper would leave Sarah with her niece who had a bunch of issues. Sarah has a criminal record to take care of. Sarah also talked about the first time she met Steve. He came to their house, barely said hello, and then disappeared into the bedroom with her mom, making a lot of noise. Sarah was outside the door, crying her eyes out, but they ignored her and kept going. This messed up experience made my 8-year-old daughter aware of that kind of stuff, and even after 7 years, she's still in therapy trying to recover from those messed up situations. At this point, man, I was pissed off at first, but now I am seriously furious. I told Pepper straight up that there was no way in hell Sarah was going back to that messed up situation. I was ready to go to war to protect my daughter. Pepper didn't waste any time and set up a last-minute court hearing in her state to try and force Sarah to come back. I had to move fast, but I managed to get a lawyer and surprisingly, I won the hearing easily, even though Pepper showed up late and tried to use her disability as an excuse. So, the judge agreed that since there was no custody agreement and some sketchy accusations against Steve, it was best for Sarah to stay with me for now. I won that round, at least for a little while. But right after the hearing, my inbox blew up with phishing emails and texts. Then I started getting requests to reset passwords and authenticate my accounts from my bank, Facebook, Reddit, and more. No doubt in my mind that Steve was behind these shady moves. Next thing I knew, Jason called me the other day with some bad news. His law firm's website, email, and phone systems got hacked. Because he had to report it to the court and was working on a big case, the FBI got involved. I was beyond angry. These two people not only messed up my life, but they also hurt my daughter and ruined my friend's reputation. It was time for them to pay for what they did, and I was determined to make sure they faced the consequences. I became obsessed with finding dirt on Steve Pepper, spending hours digging into his background. My hard work paid off when I found some juicy stuff. Turns out, Pepper was always out partying late, which explained why Sarah was always skipping school and showing up late. I even found pictures of her hanging out with some random kids. And get this, I got some neighbors who were ready to spill the beans about Sarah having to beg for food. She was always being looked after by either Bob or that shady guy. I had some solid proof against Pepper, but Steve had beefed up security on his accounts, making it hard for me to find any dirt on him. It was driving me crazy. Then I had a light bulb moment to check his LinkedIn. My gut feeling was right. There wasn't much on his profile, but I found Maria, his ex-wife, in his connections. Me and Maria started talking and she was cool with adding me on social media. We became fast friends and bonded over our mutual dislike for Pepper, who had ditched their kids just like my daughter's deadbeat dad. Maria gave me some really helpful advice. Long story short, Maria and Steve just got divorced and Steve got pretty much everything in the settlement, including the house, car, bank account, and most of their savings. He's also responsible for child support. Maria decided to give up some money so she could keep control and make sure her kids were taken care of. They had a strict custody agreement with lots of rules that Steve had to follow. If he broke any of them, he'd be in big trouble. He'd have to sell the house and split the money with Maria, and his child support payments would double, which would mess up his finances. Surprisingly, Steve didn't put up a fight. Maria was all over social media, constantly bragging about her supposedly amazing life without her. She even posted pics of her fancy stuff. Maria and I teamed up, compared notes, and came up with a plan for payback. I joined forces with Jason, who quickly told the FBI about the hacking I had dealt with. We thought it was the same person behind it all. The investigator acted fast and got in touch with me. I spilled all the details. I found out some stuff and told the FBI I thought I knew who did it. Then, they asked me if I knew where Steve worked. Turns out, Maria told me. Steve wasn't as good at hacking as he thought he was. The FBI already linked the hacking to a company where Steve worked. After talking to the FBI, I didn't waste any time and called Steve's boss to complain. I told the boss about someone trying to hack into my accounts and said I was pretty sure it was Steve. They didn't really believe me since I didn't have solid proof. But little did they know, a secret agent was on their way to pay them a visit. The next week was a total nightmare for Steve. He got served with divorce papers and his lawyer got all the evidence I had carefully gathered. My lawyer said it was the strongest case. The most thorough investigation I've ever seen. I had concrete proof of 40 times being late and 19 times not showing up, all because of partying with Steve. I had undeniable evidence of them leaving my daughter alone for long periods of time. Maria even gave me a photo taken at 2 in the morning. Right before the emergency meeting, there was a picture of Steve and Pepper drinking at a tattoo shop. During the meeting, Pepper showed up late and blamed it on a disability. Steve was then hit with the news that he had totally broken the custody agreement. Maria had photos showing he was with Pepper on nights when he was supposed to have the kids. And there was proof of Steve and Pepper talking without permission. When Steve broke the custody agreement, the fallout was crazy. He got fired from his job because of my complaint, plus some hacking stuff that happened before, and the FBI had to step in. Even though he didn't get in trouble with the law for the hacking, everyone found out why he got fired and now he can't get another IT job.